We learned how to send requests and we learned how to receive responses. But there's one big piece of the Ajax puzzle that's still missing, and that is, how do we know when a response is ready? There's obviously going to be some elapsed time between when the request is first made and when the response is received. We can't assume that the response is ready right away. That's where states and events come in. The XML HTTP request object has another function called readyState, and it will return a value which indicates the status of the current request. So you simply call xhr.readystate and you'll get back 1 out of 5 different values. And those values are going to be the numbers 0 through 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And here's what each one means. If we get a 0, it means the connection has been created but not yet opened. 1 means the connection has been opened. 2 means the request has been sent and received by the server. 3 means that the response is in progress. We've started getting data back, but we only have partial data. 4 means that the response is complete. We either have success or failure, but there's nothing further to do with this request. So when we first start out, we're going to be at 0. And then as we move through each of the steps in the process, the ready state is going to move from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 and finally 4. And we need to wait until we get to state 4 before we use the response. Now we could write a JavaScript loop that would just keep checking this value over and over and over again until we finally get to a ready state of 4. But there's a much better way to do it than that. And that's by using a feature that allows us to detect whenever the ready state changes. The XML HTTP object has another function called onReadyStateChange, all run together, all lowercase, and it's used to store a JavaScript function. And that function, whatever we define as onReadyStateChange, is going to be called each and every time that ready state changes. It doesn't matter what it changes to. It's not like it just waits till we get to ready state of 4. Every time it changes, it's going to run our function again. What it does is it prevents us from having to constantly recheck that value. Instead of checking it over and over and over again, it very kindly says, oh, I just changed to a new value. Would you like me to do anything? And it checks our function. If our function asks it to do something, it will do it. If not, then it will just wait until ready state changes to something else. And when it does, it'll call our function again. Let me show you an example in code. First, let's look at the way that we were doing it before. We instantiate a new HTTP request object, we open it, we send it. And then right away, you can see that I'm calling for XHR response text and I'm replacing some content inside the current page using that text. But most of the time, this is not going to work because the JavaScripts in line 4 and 5 are going to fire immediately. They're not going to wait for a response. And JavaScript is very fast. So as soon as this request is sent, it's going to try and replace an element in our web page, and it's going to replace it with something blank because we haven't gotten a response back yet. It's just going to disappear. Instead, what we want to do is wait for the response by setting that onReadyStateChange function. So I create my new object, I open it, but then let's stop and add a function to onReadyStateChange. You can see I have onReadyStateChange equals, and I have an anonymous function, function space, and then parentheses, curly braces, and then inside is the content of the function, the JavaScript code that it will execute. So that JavaScript code is going to check and make sure that ready state is equal to 4 before it does anything. You can see that I'm also checking to see if the status is equal to 200. Now we haven't talked about status yet, but that's another function that we can call on the XHR object. It's going to return the current HTTP status code. It's going to be 0 before anything is done at all, but as soon as a request comes back, it will be 200 if it was a success, 404 if the page was not found, or 500 if it was some kind of an error. And there are other status codes that can be returned as well. You can learn more about the HTML spec to see what those are. What I'm essentially saying here is, if the request is complete and it was a success, then run my code. And that's what's going to do. Everything that's in those curly braces after that will get executed, which is when it takes the response and puts it into the current page. Now, I've only defined my function to this point. We've got to remember, we still need to actually call send. That's our last step. We have our function, now we call send. Now, ready state will change. It'll go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 and finally 4. And each time it changes, it's going to call our function again. But our code is only going to do anything when we finally get to a ready state of 4. When it gets to 3, it's not going to do anything. Now, the code that you execute when ready state finally gets to 4 can be quite long, and you may not want to put it inside this spot in your definition for onReady state change, in which case you can define other JavaScript functions and then call those inside there. So for example, I've defined a JavaScript function called replaceElementById, pass it an ID and a block of text, and it'll just replace the content on the page. Now, when ready state is equal to 4, I just simply call that function and pass in the arguments that it needs. It can help you to keep the onReady state change function much leaner and clearer. Now, we also could have written code for if ready state was equal to 2, and we could have performed some action in that case, or if ready state was equal to 3. Or we could have written code that said if ready state was equal to 4, but status was equal to 404. In other words, we didn't get a success back, we got a page not found error instead. In every one of those cases, we can handle it differently. This is the most common one, which is let's wait for us to get to a success page and then use the results. But you could write other variations of it as well. The main idea is that it runs this onReady state change function every time the state changes, and then my code executes only when the ready state equals the value that I've provided.